This podcast episode is brought to you by Side Effects, the makers of Houdini. Right now, get your hands on Houdini Foundations for Houdini 19.5 as a print-on-demand book. The 224-page book contains 9 chapters designed to help artists take their first steps into Houdini. Visit sideeffects.com to find out more. Hi everyone, welcome to the Befores and Afters podcast. I'm Ian Fales from Befores and Afters. Today we're going back to Titanic. The James Cameron film is getting a 25th anniversary re-release, remastered in 4K 3D. To commemorate the quarter-century anniversary, I had a really fun conversation with the film's production VFX supervisor, Rob Legato. We talk about a whole range of things, including building and shooting the miniatures, crafting digital water, motion captured passengers, the morphing transitions in the film, and Propeller Guy. We also dive into some of the tougher shots in the film and harder moments during post. And Rob discusses one of his recent explorations into recreating Titanic previews with real-time game engine Unreal. All in all, there was almost too much amazing stuff in Titanic to talk about, so I apologise for not getting to every single shot or sequence in the film. I want to thank Rob for giving me so much time to look back at Titanic, for which he and Mark Lassoff, Thomas L. Fisher, and Michael Camphor won the VFX Oscar. Let's jump into our chat now. It's exciting, isn't it, Rob, that they're re-releasing it? I mean, again. I think that's a really great thing.
That it may get new viewers, new fans, new people who are mesmerized and taken on the trip. I mean, it's still surprising to me to this day that it holds up to the point where people just get sucked into the movie and they watch it again and get entertained by it. There's some magic about the film that I didn't see coming.
Yeah.
It's a good movie for sure. I saw it, as soon as I saw the scenes with Kate and Leo, you go, okay, that's working. I mean, that's their chemistry together, their fondness for one another, all that stuff comes through, and they're both very good actors, and Jim sets quite the scene, and it's good. There's no question about it. That it was phenomenal, and that people watched it 30 times literally when I went on tour to talk about it. 30 times. I was like, holy shit, I didn't see it 30 times. And I worked on the damn thing. So there's something about it that, and I don't know what those are. It kind of falls in the category of Casablanca. It's like, what is so great about Casablanca? I don't know. It comes on, it's kind of like a perfect movie, and you just watch it, and it's captivating and all the various things. There's a few movies like that where you can't really explain what the appeal is, but there is an appeal that is substantial.
Well, Rob, I was one of those people in 1997 who saw it 5 times at the cinemas within a month of it being released. So I'm fully happy to admit that. But also, I thought the 3D re-release a couple of years ago was quite great and did bring a whole new bunch of viewers in. In fact, the funniest story from that is I went to a press screening in Sydney where we were all given 3D glasses, and about 5 or 6 people snuck in, as they do to cinemas, and there was no seats, and they stood the whole time in the aisle, the whole time, but without 3D glasses on, and watched the whole film. I think they were that desperate to see Titanic again. And I just remember thinking, wow, this film really does have that aura. So basically, congratulations on being part of it. But, I just feel like it was such a big thing.
I mean, it was a big deal. I mean, it still is to some degree. We're celebrating it after 25 years. And it's going to, I thought it was amazing that they re-released it. It made $300 million. For a movie that's been out, that made that much money. It means everybody saw it who wanted to see it. $1.8 billion back then. Pretty much everybody saw it. It made $600 or $700 million in video sales. So it's saturated the market in terms of it's been seen. It's not a treasure that's been lost. So it's out there to be seen, and it shows up in the movie theater again, and it makes $300 million more than originally run films made. it's very likely that it'll happen again.
Going back to the beginning, when you came on board as VFX Soup, what do you remember were your very initial conversations with Jim about the film and about the visual effects?
Well, the thing I'm trying to remember, because I always had it when I envisioned the movie, and it wasn't for the sake of trying to invent new things. It was, how to tell this story in a way that hasn't been seen before. And it occurred to me that, and this is before CG was CG, it was really not, is that I did not want to shoot the boat in water, in real water, because my eye doesn't believe it, and if it does believe it, it believes it for 2 or 3 seconds before I start noticing that something is odd about it. You can't zoom in on it because there's nobody on the ship, because it's a miniature, so there's no one there. So, and obviously we could have, matted people in and do all that sort of stuff, but that work was even, difficult to do. And so it's like the shots that I wanted to do, and I thought Jim is either at the same point I was, or and there's some evidence to say he wasn't, um, which I'll tell you about in a minute. Or we agreed on it together, but I wanted to do these shots where it just melts before your eyes and goes from the first sensation I had when I watched the Titanic, which Jim invited me to Lightstorm, and in the screening room we watched the real footage that he shot, which is mind blowing. Music, it's because remember at that time it was just brand new that we could even see the Titanic at all. That all my life you grew up, this mystery sank, and that was the end of that. And the idea that you could go find it in the middle of the ocean was just still remarkable. And how Jim found it, by the way, just an aside, is a guy who was on that mission looked at the coordinates upside down and memorized them. So that's how Jim got to go to the real Titanic. So at any rate, so seeing that your brain sort of automatically transports you into dreaming what it looked like if it was intact, seeing people on the deck of the ship, your brain just sort of wanted to go there. That's what made it, ghost-like and mysterious, and what if, all that stuff. So at any rate, that's what I wanted to do. And to do that, CG water became something that needed to be done. And then motion capture people, which had at that point had not been used for that. And at some point, Jim lost either faith, or he never believed in the faith in the beginning, because he said, I want you to use kicker puppets on the Titanic. So when it sinks, we have real things in the water. And it's like, I don't want to do any of that. I mean, kicker puppets, how long is that shot going to last? Because he did it in like the Abyss or something like that. It was a puppet. It was like, did like feet like that. So maybe a second before you realize what you're looking at. It's like, and then to thread up 300 of them on, it's like, I thought it was crazy. And so that, what it told me is that his confidence level that we could pull that off waning, or never was there in the first place.
Right.
And when I embarked on it, you have to wait 6 months to see the evidence of you're correct or incorrect. It doesn't just happen. It doesn't like, yeah, I'm going to do this and look how great it looks. Because and as the footage got better and cooler and more interesting, your work has to fit into that thing. You can't just go take a slide downhill when now cuts to the spectacle, where you've already seen the spectacle in what Jim staged. So, but the impression at the time is there was something magical about the ghostly nature of the ship that is the anchor, excuse the pun, of the movie, the premise of let's go back and find something, which is really the MacGuffin. We're going to go back and find something. That's the excuse to unveil the story. And it seemed like, well, this is a pretty special, difficult journey that requires more art than science, more sensitivity to cinema. than not. So, and my memory could be clouded, and I remember what I want to remember, but I sort of remember that, and I remember being what I would consider on the same page as him. I just had different things I wanted to accomplish in the way I did it than Jim did. I think he was more into the in camera Skotek Brothers type stuff.
Right.
And I did not want to shoot it in water, not for any other reason that I don't believe it. I
Mm.
don't buy that miniature in water. I just don't. So I wanted to do what I wanted to do.
We were lucky enough, Rob, to speak for my book, Masters of Effects, about
Mhm.
Titanic. And I just reread that section on Titanic. And one point I remember you making was you wanted some of the ship at sea shots to feel like a cruise ship commercial. And that is
Mhm.
how they feel. The camera revolves around, I mean, basically as if it was being shot from a helicopter. Do you want to talk a
Yeah.
bit more about that? I love how that ended up in the film.
Well, and that is a very attributable, or we arrived at the same idea at the same time. Is Jim's point is we have to sell the modern audience of how grand the ship is,
Mm,
why it was so special, and if we were doing a commercial, you would entice the people to want to get on the ship. I want to spend time on that. You would feature all, just like cruise ships do now. And so the idea that, because there's a kind of an old fashioned rule that if you're doing a period movie, you shouldn't do anything modern in a period movie that they couldn't have done back in the day. And you could have that argument and not have that argument at the same time, because then it takes you out of the period.
mm,
So obviously having a helicopter back in the day didn't happen. But just say, I don't agree with that premise. I don't, the conceit of that argument, I
mm,
just don't agree with. And I want to do we call it Ode to Titanic. So, and I remember the name, the name of the shot was TD-35, which is the big shot where it sets out the sail that my son is on it playing soccer in the back of the boat,
mm.
where we basically, it was like that was like $1 million shot back in the day, literally $1 million. And that was the Ode to Titanic. That was, now we've sold the audience on how fabulous this ship is, why it meant so much to the people back then, and hence why it means so much to you now. So that whole premise of let's make a Ode to Titanic commercial, and we would photograph it the way we'd photograph it, just to highlight it. And you couldn't. There's no way of shooting a ship at sea without being in a helicopter. It's just, there's that's the way modern photography is, of submarines, of Tony Scott movies, of anything you've ever
Mm.
seen, where you're selling the grandeur or the excitement or the whatever. You're seeing it from above.
There's
So.
obviously three major things, or there's more than that, that had to be sold for shots like that. Solved for shots like that. And the first is the miniature build and shooting of the miniatures. Obviously, Digital Domain was at its stride at the time with miniature work. And I just think that ship is so beautiful, but also the photography of it was. Do you want to talk a bit about that in terms of the ship at sea and other ship shots?
Well, that was also another part of my desire to film it the way I wanted to film, is that I could light it.
Mm,
And
mm,
I got pretty good at lighting miniatures, and I knew how and why, and I knew you need to put, like, it's an actress, you need to put it in the best light for you to sell what it is. So putting it actually in water where you can't really light it the way you'd like to light it, quite frankly, or I couldn't. So there was that aspect of it, and I had full confidence in DD. I did Apollo 13, where
mm,
the meticulous work of the miniature making and my ability to photograph it, sells the thing. It's like, I got, the best model crew, ever, outside of ILM or even inside of ILM for that matter. And we have Jim, who's a hound on how meticulous he wants it and how perfectly done it was and all that stuff. So, they're full confidence that we're going to pull that portion off. Then, to make it do what I wanted to do, you have to motion control the water. You have to shoot water plates, and you have to have some water interaction. So we shot elements for that. And then to cap it all off, you need to have believable people in scale on the deck of the ship moving, because that you didn't see in A Night to Remember. You couldn't see that. And that was a very and those all those things combined, and doing a match move with the wreck was part of the gestalt of the movie, of seamlessly going in and out of the ship in its heyday to the ship, the way it exists now on the ocean floor, rotting away. So those things were the elements that cemented why and how. And then once you say that, you have to make the water work, and you have to make the people work, and all that. And that took some doing. I mean, there's nothing easy about it, especially back in the day, because you didn't have anything to fall back on.
Let's talk about those things. I mean, I remember the water, you probably relied on that French
Yeah, Arete.
arete.
And the interesting thing about it was, and I don't know why anybody else wasn't as on board as I was, but anyway, it was essentially a command line program that was written specifically to spy on Russian submarines, and from the wake that it created, back analyze, it must be this model submarine, so that it can identify from above. So they had to totally create the properties of water to do this fingerprint of the wake. And so in so doing, they were able to recreate water. Now, what they didn't do is artistically, light it and reflect in it. There was no need for them to do it that way, but they knew they had something. And so they were a very young company. They didn't have anything that was even remotely a production tool. And Waterworld used it for one shot, of which I saw their little ad. So they did one shot of it. And while I didn't necessarily agree with how they photographed the foreground of it, it's like, I could see that working. And so I said, I want to do that. And then literally Mark Lassoff, who won Academy Award for Titanic, quit. He literally just quit. It can't be done. Just so he taped his resignation on my door, and he reflected the sensibilities of the rest of the company. And I just didn't believe it. It's like, we'll make that work. They already did the work. I'm just making it artistic. I'm just making it so you can put, and we have geniuses here, and that's the great thing about having geniuses around you, is even if they don't know they can do it, they can do it. So at any rate, it was a force of will, and then we turned it into a production tool, and we had to inherit what was difficult about it, and how much render time it took, where we had 60 CPUs in the building. That's all we had. And we're doing 2 movies or 3 movies with 60 CPUs and literally half a terabyte of storage. So that was what we owned at the time. And so it required getting NT workstations and making a render farm of 200 cheap machines, which, believe it or not, back in the day, the artists who came to work there were completely disappointed that they thought they're going to work on a $60,000 SGI machine, and in fact, it's a $3,500 NT machine. And I, not knowing enough, was like, "Does it do the same thing?" Yes. Then who gives a shit? Then what the fuck do we care? I don't get it. But there was a prejudice against using it, so people had to be forced to use this render farm to just make the date. And because somebody predicted, one of the guys who was the technical person there, he predicted that it was like, we will finish the movie in 2010 with the render time. It's like, right. Well, we're not doing that. And then I found out something really stupid, as we go a little tangent here, is I thought that the stuff that made it look really real, which is the foreground stuff, that stuff took all the render time. Nope, 15 minutes. From a portion back to infinity, that took 10 hours or some crazy number back then. And it was like, well, that's bullshit. Why don't we just do like 8 frames and cycle them in the background, and then the foreground sells this water. The rest, and what the problem is, it doesn't really know that the visual of the camera is stacking one thing over another. So you're seeing 20 miles. Here you're seeing 200 yards of water, easy to render. 20 miles of it is not. So using all the same computational power to do this thing where, because it stacks up, you can't even tell what it is. You might as well be a still for that matter. And so then that's, I don't think I'm responsible for it, but that started to change how we would and what quality we'd render the 20 miles compared to the foreground. So we're able to optimize our renders and get our work done and all that. But it was definitely in its infancy, but it was good enough where it fooled one of the production supervisors, not visual effects production supervisor, but on the live action, where we created a plate, a thing, a shot of water, and the guy says, "Oh God, we got our first shot." It's like, no, that's a test for water, and he was kind of blown away. So, so we
wow.
knew we had something in that regard, but it wasn't that. It was the shot that you could produce because you had motion controllable water was what the innovation was, really the artistic innovation. The other one is, is you have to invent it to get the art of it. And it's interesting, we're talking about this movie, and Avatar: The Way of Water came out, where water work beyond your imagination is produced. But back then, people would quit because there's no way we could actually do that. And in fact, at DD, if I remember correctly, and I do actually, is they wanted to then make up their own water at Digital Domain and not use Arete. And they showed me a test. It took them a month to come up with it. And it's like, no fucking way are we doing that. There's zero chance of that. Well, we wanted you to consider it. I just did. And the answer is no. And it's not even no, it's fuck no. We're not doing that. But it's so much cheaper. I don't give a shit. You know what's really cheap is no one going to see the movie because it looks like dog meat. So we're not doing that. And
I love
but
it.
everybody has to get their licks in. They tried. They're the same. It was the same group, by the way. The same group of people. I was doing Apollo 13, and my idea was for the splashdown, take a capsule, attach parachutes to it, throw it out of a helicopter, and I'll shoot it. Follow it down to the thing. And they said they wanted to do that in CG. It's like, well, I don't. I want to go shoot it for real. I mean, it's a quarter scale model. I'll shoot it at like 40 frames, 36 frames a second or something like that. And, and I don't mind if the shot's in slow motion because it adds to the grandeur of it. So it's not like I'm trying to fool you exactly, but it's, because it's a mesmerizing shot when you look at it. And they said no. Well, they didn't say no because it wasn't like I was going to listen either. But they said, well, we want to prove to you that we could do it. It's like, you can prove all you want, but I'm not interested. And they showed me from Outbreak. I don't know if you remember this movie Outbreak, but there was a shot in it where people who worked at Boss Film did parachutes of a little box being thrown out of a helicopter, and they had and it was like, I remember everybody showing up in the screening room, very similar, show up in the screening room, and they put this thing on. And they said, so? I said, are you showing this to absolutely prove my point that there's no chance in hell I would ever do that in a million years? That would never happen. That is so bad looking. Well, we wanted you to consider it. It's like, I consider it is that it's proof positive not to do that. That's what I consider. And it was just and it was the same. I had the same group come in, show me their version of CG water compared to what Arete spent, military money coming up with the perfect way of doing it. And then we made a nice tool. I mean, the geniuses at DD made a nice production tool out of it, so you could dial in how much reflection and all that stuff, and not too much wind. I mean, it wasn't, it's definitely crude in comparison to what it is, but it was good enough for what we needed to accomplish.
Right. Yeah. Maybe in a similar vein, you realized that you needed to have these people on the deck of Titanic. And in another film, you might have just shot lots of 2D elements from lots of different angles. And the challenge, I'm guessing, is the camera was meant to revolve around and the camera could be anywhere. So you went, at least for many shots, with, motion captured actors. But I'm really curious what the state of play with mocapped actors was in 95, 96, 97, because it's still really
There was,
early days, right?
there was no state of play. It was never
Yeah.
used to actually produce a person, at
Mm.
least in my knowledge. I mean, there was never a film. They used it to be, like a skeletons fighting, a Ray Harryhausen type thing,
Yeah.
or a knight in armor, or a robot, but never to reproduce a person. It was never, at least I've never had not seen it at that point. So I was very interested in it because of the shot it allowed me to be able to do. And you could shoot, and we did some stuff for the dock scenes where we shot people on cards, and you could do a little bit of a camera move
Mm.
uh, on it, but you couldn't do a lot. You could do a little bit because as soon as you get that high, then you'd see the top of their heads and all that sort of stuff. So you could do that, and people, and that would work to some degree, but it wouldn't really work for what we were doing or what I wanted to do, which is these kind of sweeping camera moves that spin around and do things, not to show off the camera move so much as to convince you of the 3D nature of the ship. That's not just a shot that you could, it wasn't like I was even like trying to make you believe that it wasn't a composite. It was just that's not how I saw the shooting of the ship. That we
Mm.
wanted to embrace. It's a commercial for the Titanic. I want you to believe that we could do anything. That means we must have built it all. And that's the shot you would do as opposed to the shot you had to do because it was an effect. So I wanted to remove it had to be that way. And sometimes a lock off works great and you go with that. But for the most part, the artistic moment, the transition that I was going for, which I eventually got, was I needed full control over the underwater ship. I need full control of the above water ship, full control of the water, and full control of the people on it. And the mix of all those characters would create something that I've never seen before. And my belief system then and is now, we go to the movies to see something we've never seen before.
Yeah. Well, what did you have to solve with? I'm guessing it was with DD, but also was it House of Moves at the time with those mocapped actors?
Yeah, I mean, the thing to prove is the look of it. And
Mm.
I remember a couple of battles. The one of them was that I wanted real photographic textures on everything.
Mm.
Photographic, I want to photograph people and use that as a texture map. And they cheated a couple times, and I was going nuts, where they just put, instead of on their shoes, they just put CG black, just like a black card or
Mm.
whatever. And
Mm.
I pegged it every time. It's like, that looks like shit. You're not using a photographic texture because I don't believe any of it. And sure enough, they were cheating and, we could just use this red that we picked here. It's like, no, I want a photograph of a red sweater, a red thing as the object, because my brain picks up on the little imperfections, from compositing and doing stuff, that red isn't really red. It's a bunch of other different colors mixed in to make that particular shade. It has a texture to it, and part of the texture is black dots and white dots. It's never like this perfect 100% sheen of a color. It's broken up to, even the grain breaks it up. And so I just wouldn't buy any of that. So that was a bit of a fight. Well, it's easier. It's like, don't, and that's the kiss of death. Don't tell me it's easier. I don't want
Mm.
to hear it's
Mm.
easier. I don't want it to be difficult on purpose, but I don't want the reason why it doesn't look as good as it can because you found it easier to do it that way than to go get a photograph of black shoes or shiny, a vinyl or whatever, and create the illusion of shoes or pants or buttons or hats or whatever. I just do not want that perfect straight color that has no variance in it. And so there was that. The other thing was, and it was completely true. It's not anybody's fault. We got the motion capture gag working, or the idea of it, and the CG guys um, showed me all the stuff they captured to use these for the ship. And I looked at it, and not to be a dick about it, but it was like, that looks terrible. I mean, yeah, I believe it's the finance officer, because he walks that way, and I believe that. I just don't believe them as actors on the
Mm,
ship. They look like nameless faces walk cycles, and they just don't look like the real thing. And so I said, I want to shoot it. I want to do it. And I shot it the way I would shoot anything else is I shot it take after take after take and kept on redirecting them and made little vignettes of picking up a baby and showing them, looking over the railing, people holding hands, describing in mid-conversation, doing lifelike things, sweeping the deck, doing something when somebody walks by, they notice them, stuff that when your eye sees it, they're doing something so normal that you don't pay attention to it. When they're just ships crossing in the night that never notice each other, you tend to feel the lack of humanity in it. It's the same theory I have for matte paintings versus shooting real elements. Is that if you shoot a matte painting of someone's impression of New York, it has no soul because they're perfect buildings are next to other perfect buildings, and New York isn't like that. New York is this particular building, and the type of people walk in that are different than this particular building, and the businessmen who walk in here, and the taxi cabs, and and so it tells you this story of when it was built. This one's old, this one's new, this one is this clientele, this one, and so, but without it, it's generic and it doesn't give you anything. It doesn't give you any sense whatsoever
mm,
of any kind of humanity or reality. So it leaves you cold. And so it's the same thing of, people who have no direction, walking or sitting or doing something. They need to be doing something that we recognize as a human. And then we stop looking at it because we believe it to be real. So that was the rationale. And so once I did that, it started to come to life where you then would populate these little vignettes everywhere, and it catches your eye only for a beat to go, okay, and you look away because it looks like something that you would think somebody would do if they were on the ship. So if you study it, you'll see those little moments and people serving somebody and checking the menu and reading a book and putting the book down and putting a blanket over them. You see all kinds of stuff like that, and they didn't do anything like that. And not to discredit them because it's directing. That's what
mm,
we tend to do in real life. I mean, the hardest thing I've ever shot is extras who should never be on camera because no matter what you do, yes, they're a human, but they're not acting and they're stiff as a board, and I don't believe them for a second. So, why magically that person now walking in CG transferred to look like a person on deck of a ship would work?
mm,
It doesn't, and it's all for the same reasons why it doesn't work in real life too, in shooting a
mm.
movie. So those are kind of the challenges there. And the big challenge was, Jim had to, eventually get on board with it.
Right.
He had to believe the little bit of information he was getting bit by bit, that it would work, that we could pull it off. But,
Rob, it's hard to pinpoint my favorite part of Titanic. I love it so much, but it's probably the underwater sequences and
yeah.
actually how that interacts with the real stuff Jim shot for down there, and also the miniature subs and the other kind of digital compositing involved. Can you tell me a bit about that process of matching the real footage and what approach you did take to shooting the wreck as a
Yeah, I
miniature?
mean, there was a little bit of serendipity that happened. I mean, the traditional way that you would shoot and anything in water is smoke, so that's a given. Um, the thing that I was striving for that was hard for me to get was the natural attenuation of light. Light gets absorbed rather quickly in terms of color temperature. It starts off warm at the source,
Mm,
and very quickly, as it goes further and further in water, becomes bluer and bluer and bluer. And you can't just make it blue all the way. You can't just make it, and because it's in motion, it wasn't like some compositing trick that I could do. So, believe it or not, this is when Caleb Dashnell was on the movie, and he said something that I thought at the time was a little preposterous because I was shooting with literally mag lights, the flashlight
mm,
mag lights. They were which is lighting the scene, and we're shooting at 2 frames a second or some thing, And he said, well, why don't you backlight it? And it's like, backlight it? I'm not lighting it at all. It's there's no light coming from the
Mm.
surface. That's crazy shit. And so I went home and thought about it. And then I used to read American Cinematographer magazine, and I knew about this trick, this flashing trick that Vilmo Zsigmond did. And then what I got from Caleb is like, well, if I get these lights, the kinoflows, and I make it about 5 stops underexposed. So I have a bed of backlight essentially. But if I just develop the film with the exposure I did of it, it'd be black. There would be nothing there. But what ends up happening is because it's got a little bit of light on it, it just needs a little bit more to expose that layer and not the other 2 layers because it's only blue light. So I'm only exposing the blue layer of film. So it has a warm mag light that is warm because it has normal exposure. And as it gets darker and darker and darker, the last little bit of exposure happens to be blue because it's adding to the blue record that has this flashing done to it. The red record and the green record don't have it because I didn't expose for that. I exposed blue light, and I had to take the clip off, or the front end off my light meter because it was impossible to read it. So I had to take that off. That little white piece of plastic that imitates a face, the curvature of a face. I would take that off. I would get it to literally be 5 stops underexposed. So when the last couple of stops hit it, it has enough to just bring up the exposure on that layer only. And I got then the light to attenuate to blue. And then we did a particularly good job. Or part of what I wanted to achieve is studying how Jim's subs moved and the speed at which they moved. And so what I normally do when I'm faced with something like that is I do tests where I dead rotoscope like a bird flying or something. So it's like a completely nail. This is the way the bird flies. It's just rotoscoped. It's basically like motion capturing it. So I did that with the one of Jim's shots and superimposed that with one of our models, so I could get the same exact sensation of speed. That too fast and too slow tends to belie, or it won't belie how it's done if it's exactly the same speed at the same time. So, and I didn't over embellish it by making it fancy the way I shot it. I acted like I was a camera in another sub going at that speed, photographing something at that speed. So the dead imitation of that, and then you have to do some testing involved to how much smoke is involved, and the smoke also accentuated and made the attenuation to blue work by particular amounts. So we'd have to sort of get to the artistic level and scientifically know how to reproduce it, and we did, and so I was really super proud of it. And I to this day it holds up and it looks like what it is. And I shot it. I didn't shoot it on 2 perf like Jim did, but I shot it 4 perf. But we only used a portion of the frame the way he did because it was Super 35. He shot it. It was very clever of him. He shot at 12 frames a second because it goes so slow, and he shot it at 2 perf, so he has double the amount of footage because he can't reload when you're down there. So so it's twice as slow and then twice as much footage as you normally have in a mag. And so we, made sure that ours was not better quality than what Jim had shot. And it's one of those attentions to detail that I love doing. It's that last little, bit of nuance that makes you believe that it's real. And I still love it to this day. I still am very proud of it. I'm delighted that Caleb told me something that I didn't realize the wisdom of it until I studied it. And I don't know if he knew that that's what he meant by it, but there's something about that idea of backlighting and creating this bed of exposure that is invisible to the eye until the little mag light excites it, and then it shows up. So those are the little and I don't know if I don't think I could even do that in digital. I don't even know if that would work. I think only film might only make that work because it has a latent image. It's an accumulative effect of light on top of light. and you have to separate those two things out. So maybe in CG you could do it, but as a digital element or digital thing, I don't know if
Yeah.
you could. So that was particularly proud of that, and I believe it sets up the story that's rooted in mystery, fascination that we're actually able to photograph it and see it up close, tell the story that we're telling, which is they got the little smaller subs that get deployed and go into the bowels of the ship. Like you couldn't wait as an audience member to see what they were seeing,
Mm.
and we had like fish and a couple of things, and all that underwater stuff was just so cool to do. And there's something magical about underwater anyway. Obviously, Jim is fascinated by it
Yeah.
to this day. Yeah, so all
Yeah.
that stuff, led to or made me believe that story helped set up why we're fascinated to watch the rest of the movie. That there's something about if you got off on the wrong foot, you'd be like, you know, you wouldn't be into the movie as much as you have.
It really creates that emotional connection. I totally agree. What also is interesting to me is seeing people find the B-roll or behind the scenes things about the underwater sequences, Rob, these days, and realize the wreck miniature was filmed inverted. And
Yeah.
obviously, there must have been a convenient reason for that or smoke reason. But I always think that's a really cool thing to still look at today.
No, the reason, honestly, I was done is that there's only two ways of having the mirror subs go is you create an expensive gantry
Mm,
and have, these things that could crisscross, or the other, you flip the ship upside down and then you put the dolly track on the ground, and then the mirror subs are,
mm,
are flying
mm.
across the ship that way.
Right. I love it.
So it was simple, it sounds like it'd be, more involved than that, but it was like, well, a lot of times, you just invert the idea and you find the better solution. Like it's like when you first discover how you could do these exciting chase scenes, and you discover that relative to camera, the car or the thing you're photographing isn't really doing much of anything. You're doing that. But because the ground is going 60 miles an hour, it looks like you're in this frenetic chase scene. So it's really, once you get that gag, then you go, oh, okay. If I shoot a plate and I do this, I can very simply create something that looks terribly exciting because I just invert the thing. And that's the way models work anyway. The camera moves to indicate that the model is moving. The model's
Mm,
not really moving, the camera's moving.
mm,
Against a stationary background, looks like it's moving through space. So that same idea just gets carried across when you
mm.
do this kind of work.
Another thing I just love about this film are the transitions. And of course,
Mm-hmm.
they're to take you back to the time, but also to current time. And
Mm-hmm.
they were just so beautifully art directed and had such a great use of, I mean, I guess it's morphing tools at the time when morphing had become a little bit of a gimmick and a little bit of a thing in commercials and music videos. But here there's such an artistic sense to it, Rob. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about them. Sometimes it's shipwreck to modern ship, or it's Rose's eye to old Rose. They're just
Well, the
beautiful.
reason why we did the things the way we did is for those shots. It wasn't the byproduct of that. Is that I wanted to do those shots, which created the reason why I needed to do the work the way I did it.
Mm,
So that was a plan from the beginning. What I discovered, and I love the psychology of things. So one of the things I did was, where are you looking? When you're looking at a shot, where
mm,
are you looking? What are you staring at? And when you do a transition from one point to the other, the common thing is, and especially with a morph, is everything changes all at the same time, like a cross dissolve. Everything happens. But what if you cross dissolve in bits and pieces where my eye isn't looking? And so what I did is started to go, where would I want, and I would start knowing that the periphery is where I would change first, because I'm looking at the two people on the deck of the ship, and all of a sudden the side of the ship is now changing and getting rusticles on it, and the water slowly changing, and then now I'm noticing. So now I divert my eye from the reason why I was staring at it, when I was staring, because now I'm seeing something else, and that's when I would change the middle. And I did it, and there was no science to it; it was all art to it. So every day in the screening room, it's like, nah, we're doing it too fast, too soon. Now go 8 frames later, and we kept on playing with this rate so that you don't, and a lot of times you do these, or people get fascinated by the process of a morph. They want to see it, like, wow, look at that! Just
Mm,
you see it, you
mm,
see the effect, as opposed to you don't see the effect. You just, I don't know exactly when it started and stopped, but all of a sudden now it's the other thing. So I was more interested in that portion of it, where I do not want to see the effect. I want you to dream the idea of it as a viewer, because that's what I did. When I looked at the ship, I pictured in my mind's eye people on the deck of the ship and starting to walk around, and what it might have looked like, and what it looked like pristine. And so I wanted to create that just by looking at the underwater wreck of Jim's original footage. So that's what inspired that. And then, my sort of style, I guess, if you call it that, is I don't like you to notice what I'm doing, to feel it but not notice it.
mm.
That you're going for an emotional effect more than you're going for a visual effect or a trick. Um, where it's like a card trick. All of a sudden, it's like, oh, this is your card. You just don't see how it was done. It's magic. I mean, it's literally magic.
Mm.
And so I was going for that aspect of it, because that I thought was the high art of doing this, because it is what the audience wants to see. I'm giving the audience what it wants to see, and taking advantage of where your eye looks at any one time on a screen, and not do the obvious and look at that move. You're going to look at this move, notice it, and as soon as you notice that, then this one's already started to change. So I looked away. So, divert your eye. It's a card trick. I do this, and you look over here. In the meantime, I change it over here. That's the industry of it, or the science, or the art of it.
Mm.
It's misdirection. So all of it was done that way. And once you go from the wreck to the pristine version, the reverse now becomes acceptable as well, where as she's telling her story and the story is winding down, and then all of a sudden it goes, I love that shot. It was one of my favorite shots. And it leaves the little scarf that's blown in
Mm.
the breeze when she's flying on the deck of the ship. So and I kept that on to the very, very end, because there was something about, that's the vision I had when I thought I saw somebody on the ship. And it could be an optical illusion that you think you see something as well. So you play with that aspect as well. But I love that it just seemed like the rate of coming out of the TV screen to her, and the story that she was telling, it all felt like it worked the way I
Mm.
had hoped it would.
I must tell you about one of the most popular articles I've ever published at Befores and Afters, Rob, and it was with you contributing, but also Andy Jones, which is a
Mm.
story on Propeller Guy.
Oh,
People
yes.
just resonate with this because, of course, it's a shocking moment in the film, but also for the time, I think it's so convincing and again combines all the different elements. Plus, it had the extra effect of revealing that it's John Landau's face, scanned
Yeah.
face on Propeller Guy. I mean, I just wanted to bring that up because it's such a cool shot.
Well, it was one of those things where, again, why it resonates is, Billy Crystal brought it up at the Academy Awards
Yeah.
about Propeller Guy. So it was part of the magic of the movies. It's like somehow that shot transcends itself. It was Andy Jones' first animation job. The other thing I forgot to tell you about the motion capture stuff
Mm.
that happened is we discovered very early on, and there's a couple things I did for the guys that were falling off the ship, and I think we might have used the same sort of animation, to a certain degree, for Propeller Guy before he actually hit the propeller and spun around. Is I had two motion control cameras, guys in suits with stripes on, and literally rotoscoped frame by frame, so you have two views, so you could know where the arm goes exactly, because now you have a depth to tell you that it's here or there. And they would literally rotoscope the movement, and that became the motion capture that we would then add the fall to fall longer or whatever.
Mm.
So we did that, and then we discovered as we were doing the stunts that it took so long to clean up the motion capture work that all we did is we used the skeleton and did like every third or fourth frame to get the exact timing, and in a half hour we could get a very convincing motion captured stunt, or it could take a week of cleanup, because back then the cleanup was extreme. I mean, motion capture wasn't what it is today. The resolution of the cameras that were photographed, well, there was all kinds of reasons, but the fast version of it works just as well. Is essentially roto capture, we called it, is because what you're really trying to get is the exact how the weight shifts and when the arm moves, and it moves this way and that way, and you need two different views. That's why I shot it with two different cameras. And in fact, we came up with, even on the day, not on the day, but as a thing that I wanted to do, that Mike Camphor did a little science project on, is to get to know exactly where things were in depth on the set. I had two Nikon cameras, one shutter release, and we had a device built that had click stops that were pre-measured, so that if you put like a cube in the middle, at a certain distance, you knew exactly what the distance apart these cameras were. And then as we moved them, if you needed closer up, they would be closer together. If there was far away, then the cameras would be far away. And we're able to now, in a very short period of time, Doug Roble, I believe, was the genius who came up with the software of it for essentially photogrammetry. And we're able to just, even if nothing else, say, okay, on the deck of the ship, this bollard would be here, this guy would be there. And we know in depth where everything was. It was still manual, but it basically allowed you to take a couple photographs and know where every item on the set was. And the reason for its being is that I know how Jim shoots, and as soon as we're done shooting, clean sweep, get everything out, move this thing over here, and you would never have time to measure or do whatever. So I need to do something that was super fast, and all these things become what we do now, except the tools are better. The ideas are the same, but the tools are better.
Yeah, I mean
But
that.
Propeller Guy was one of those magic things, and I was never totally sold by it. To
Oh,
tell you the truth, like it was like, well, I got it as good as I can. I love that I put John Landau's face on it, and all that, and so and maybe it was a little noticeable, and why I had a little bit of a problem with it, because there's something weird about it, and the action, and it's bold, it's all that stuff. There's something about it that was, because the idea is quite good, the guy falling and hitting the propeller. There's something about that idea, and became a noteworthy piece of business. Put Andy Jones on the map. He's the guy who did Propeller Guy.
I love it. I love it. Rob, what was it like for you in the height of post production? Again, DD was the central house, so you could be there. But because there were all these amazing vendors, and I'm guessing most of them were in LA, what was that like at the time? Things were still on film. I'm guessing you were reviewing in screening rooms. What's your memory
Well,
of driving around
I
LA
was
or
very busy doing my stuff, and then
mm,
Jim, being who Jim is, he's like, I know how to talk to these guys. Don't I'll take care of it. It's like, okay. And then there was a thing, I don't like giving up shots that I do, and so one of them was the first class lounge. That was the one where the company just failed. They were on it for like 6 months, and Jim said, "All right, I give up. Go fix it." Go.
mm,
And so I get to now see what they did. And these guys came, not to talk out of school, but I will. These guys came over, and they thought they were finaling the shot.
oh,
And I ran it a couple times in our screening room at DD, and I had about 20 pages of notes of chapter and verse of everything that was wrong with it. And they thought they were there to final it. I said, "You are so far away from finding the shot." I said, "All I can tell you is that shot will never be in this movie. There's no chance that shot is ever going to get in there. I am not allowing it. Jim is not allowing it. It's not going in the film. We'll drop it before we'll use that."
mm,
And so then they said, "Okay, can we be part of fixing it then?" And I said, "Sure." And so I went to this company every day and incrementally undid the stuff that they did not correctly, and got it to finally work to some degree. It's still
Okay.
not 100%. It's a lot of times I wish I would just have done it myself, because I know how to set up my own shots.
Mm. Mm.
When you inherit somebody else's work, why they did that and out of that order is harder for me to do, even if they're correct and I'm not. It's just like, wipe it away. Let me bake the cake. I know how to bake my own cakes, so let me do it. And your cake, I might be good, but I don't know how to do that one. I know how to do mine. So, but I remember that. So that it was not easy. There's some, to be very frank, there's some shots that turn out great, and Richard Hollander did a really good job on a lot of stuff.
Mm.
And then there was some other vendors that did not turn out as great. It was very hard for me to give up something that I knew I could make better.
In 1997, were you able to look at anything as digital files, like from another
Not
vendor, or,
well,
or no?
not well. Our system was different. We had a high res sort of preview device. Took a while to load it. It was all loaded in memory. I think IBM made it. It was like a frame store thing. So you could only load X number of frames. And we would, and it was way different when we went to Sony. We would, I would only final something after I put it under the microscope of the frame store, because I could blow it up, move over, study this portion here, go over here, study that portion,
Mm.
and then I would give very detailed notes. And it became very obvious. If you just did it on film, it tends to gloss over stuff. You can't really stop it on a frame and study it. You can't, although you could rock and roll a little bit, you really can. And after a while, you trash the film. So the degree of examining under a microscope that thing I only did on the frame store. But you had to get the files to it. It took a while to load it. It was memory that was fairly expensive, and
Mm.
you can only get so many frames on at any one time. But other companies didn't have something like that, and they didn't do it. And when I went to Sony, they would film it out, and it's like, how come you're filming it out? I didn't even see it yet. I mean, it's like, well, we film it out. We bid 7 or 8 film outs. It's like, we did one. We did
Oh.
one film out. We didn't do 7 or 8 film outs. We did, and they never checked things on a frame store. I made them do it for What Lies Beneath, because I just couldn't stand working that way. It's like, I can't sit in the theater and just watch it once and say it's fine. It may not be fine. And sure enough, as time progresses, that gets put on 4K, and then people watch it at
Mm.
home. Watch it, so now it does stand the test of time. I learned a valuable lesson when I did was on Apollo 13, and I was very meticulous about every element. And this is in the 8-bit days. So I was did a shot. I can tell you what the shot is. It's in Apollo 13. It's the lights that are at night shining on the Saturn V rocket. It was the families of the astronauts who would come, and they would be on one side, and the astronauts would be on the other, because they couldn't get too close to one another because they might get infected. So that was the shot. And we went to do it, and the person painted in some of the distant light shafts, the things that were in the misty Florida air,
Mm.
the humid air. You could see the shaft from the light, and I didn't like it, and I thought it looked not very good. And what I normally do is I gamma everything up so I can see the sins. You could see the black levels are off, and that's something that the compers didn't like, because it's really like exposing yourself, because you see every malady that's in there, the blacks that are not consistent, the different color in the blacks, all that stuff gets buried when you see it contrasty. And
Mm.
hence, when you see it on film, you see it kind of buried a little bit if the exposure isn't exactly right, but it's junk underneath. So I at any rate, I got everybody and their brother to tell me the shot was fine. Don't, look at it this way. It's really good, and it's 8-bit, and it's the best they can do. And I didn't like it because it looked like it was a cutout. I just hated it. But sure enough, when you print it down and bury the blacks, it looked the way it should. One day I was on a plane, and the black level of the TV set, back then it was a CRT, was raised way up, and that shot looked like shit. And it was like, well, that lives forever. And so
Mm.
when I went to do Titanic, I was like, there's no chance I'm letting that go by. I'm just not going to do it. I got burned once where I was embarrassed. It was like, I remember the conversation. I remember giving in. I remember saying, it goes against my better judgment. And it literally was like 10 people were like hammering me to let the
Mm.
shot go by.
Mm.
And it was like, all right, I know I've been difficult, but all right. And then it still haunts me to this day, that this shit is a movie that lasts forever. But
I want to just finally give a bit of a shout out to something I've seen you do recently because you've kind of been exploring real time and game engines. I noticed you'd done a couple of presentations where you sort of went back to previs of Titanic using some real time tools. That's a lot of fun. Do you want to just talk about that really briefly?
yeah, well, I was basically saying in the demonstration was that the idea remains the same, and the tools to see that idea come to fruition alter, but the initial concept, the idea of why you do it and how you do it remains the same. So in the case of Titanic, the clever way of doing real-time artistic previs, meaning that I get a camera and I go, I don't like that, I like this. Let me go a little lower, put the light over here. Let me see what that, you're making like 100 different calculations in a very short period of time. And you go, okay, take that picture. Okay, that's that shot. Okay, that's that shot. And those became storyboard frames. So somebody would take these video clips, print them up, overdraw on them. So the angle is exactly right and they're reproducible. And the idea of the shot is good. The backbone of the shot is correct. It's shot with a real lens. The lens is calculable. So you could say, yes, that was shot with a 20, this was shot with a 40. I shot at this height, and all that stuff now becomes the reason why you're doing that kind of previs. And the tool that you're using it is malleable. So I can pick it up and yeah, I think this is a cool shot. Now let me go higher. Okay, that's cool. No, that's not right. Okay, a little, and you keep on doing it, and then you go, that's the one. That's the shot that goes in the
Mm.
movie. Well, that hasn't changed. Now, what I did is in Unreal is I showed that that's what I did back then, and now I could even recreate the mechanics of how I did it back then, but the end result is the same. So now that I can do it in Unreal, is I can grab the mount, the controller, and that becomes literally the lipstick camera. I can make myself, 10 times bigger than I really am, and I could essentially do what I'm doing there is I'm a lipstick camera and I could do this shot. So I could do the helicopter moves, and that's what I illustrated there. But the art remains the same. The technique of how to get to the art is different. And because that was a very clever idea, and I have to give credit to Jim for that, because that's what he liked to do. And for the same reasons that I like to do it, is I know pretty much what I want to do, but the actual moment is, I don't want to leave it up to somebody else to interpret. It's, I picked a 20 for this reason. I picked a 40 for this reason. I shot it from this angle for that reason. There's all these reasons for art and editing and everything that you can do. They're too much to give up to somebody else to have them discover it by accident because they don't have your brain. Not that it's bad, it's that they're not thinking of the sequence. They're just thinking of how to get through this shot. And this shot looks just as good as that. But they don't see the 4 shots ahead of it. They don't see the 5 shots before it. They just see what they're doing. So you really need to do that because you're the one responsible for that moment in time. And so that's where I came up with, and I thought it was an interesting illustration is tool was different, and we do previs. I mean, George Lucas did it with the TIE fighters. He found footage
Mm.
that did what he wanted to do, and much the same way, by the way, that Maverick, Top Gun, has done. They shot a real plane, did this. It's a perfect piece of animation, and you just put your ship on top of it, and you all of a sudden you have something memorable, like the TIE fighters in Star Wars were very memorable. That was like, holy shit, that's like really incredible.
Mm.
Unlike any motion control shots ever done before, because he essentially used this real-time previs with warts and all of how it moved to create the verisimilitude of real life. And that's what we're doing with the lipstick camera. That's what we're now doing with Unreal, that I can walk into a VR scene and grab a camera and operate it like I would operate a real live camera. And so it tends to look like it. It tends to look like that kind of thing. So that's what I found interesting, is that it took a village to get that to work. And then it normally would have taken a village to get the previs to work. And now in Unreal, I could do it myself. So I don't need 50 billion people to do it. I can end up actually accomplishing what I need to accomplish by myself. And so that was what that was about. A long-winded version of what that was about, but that's what it was about.
I've loved seeing it, and I recommend people check out the real-time conference presentation where you showed that. It was super cool. Rob, it's been so fun chatting to you about a film that came out 25 years ago that still has groundbreaking work in it. Thank you for making it, and thanks for chatting to me. Really appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. My pleasure. You made me remember a bunch of stuff I forgot.